Good morning, everybody. We're here today to provide an update on the progress in relation to the development of the indicator set for the Thriving Glasgow portrait, and to create an opportunity for everybody who's been involved so far to re-engage with the work. So I'd like to hand over, first of all, to Annika, who will give us some background to the work. And if you could start by introducing yourself, Annika, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks, Jo. Hi, everyone. I'm Annika Jelmskog, and I've been a researcher with Gallant since the beginning of this process, when Glasgow decided to produce a city portrait and engage with this donut economics framework, which was part of its COP26 legacy. So what I'll do is just briefly take us back to the beginning and refresh our memories, starting with this donut and some of the ways that we've engaged with it to think about potentials for sustainable transformation. So for those of you who aren't familiar, this donut framework itself, which is on the left of the slide, is our visual compass for human prosperity. So it represents to us this goal of thriving. The green space in the middle of the two rings is what we're aiming for. And it's described as the safe and just space for humanity, where all of our social needs are met, meeting that inner ring of the social foundation without transgressing planetary boundaries and overshooting the outer ring, which is the ecological ceiling. So we don't want anyone to fall in the hole in the middle, but we also want to keep within ecological limits. And this is what we mean when we talk about meeting the needs of all people within the means of the living planet. So our task and the purpose of creating a thriving portrait for Glasgow with thriving indicators is to work out exactly what existing within the donut would look like for Glasgow, and then do our best to try and make that happen. So the Glasgow donut will be completely unique, and even though places all over the world are experimenting with this framework, the crucial thing for us is to create something that's really locally relevant and meaningful, rather than to compare ourselves against other places. So instead, we want to have a very specific Glasgow vision, which takes a long-term view for humanity and prosperity, and think about future generations. And that is what defines our thriving future. And then we can use that as a benchmark. So we use the donut framework to compare where we want to be in the future as a thriving city that respects people and nature with where we think we are now. And then we want to track this progress over time. And that's then what we will use those thriving indicators for. Now, the first step in that process is to define what a thriving future could look like. And that's what this timeline shows, the process that we underwent to do that. And we were working with stakeholders across the city, including, I know, many of you on this call today, to open up some of those discussions about possible transformative pathways and to define the future that we collectively would like to see in Glasgow. Next slide, please. So to do that, what we needed to do was break the donut down to make it easier to understand at the city level. And what we did was to follow the city portraits methodology that other places like Amsterdam had been working on with the Donut Economics Action Lab. And this particular framework gets us to think about thriving at our level, at the level of our place, from 4 different perspectives, which are all connected. So we try to define what it would look like to exist within the donut for all these lenses, meaning all of our local citizens would be able to thrive, but in ways that don't harm the well-being of others worldwide or cause global ecological harms. And these are really important things to try and define when we think about things like Glasgow's supply chains or what it does with its waste. Next slide, please. Now, our first attempt to do that, to define where we are now compared with where we want to be, was a desk-based portrait, which is made up of a total of 44 dimensions across those 4 lenses. And to do the desk-based portrait, we used official targets and goals from existing Glasgow policies and compared them to some snapshot indicators, which were mostly publicly available statistics or data points that most closely matched those dimensions. And the purpose of this is to try and show us how far away we are at the minute. And this was a really useful sort of snapshot exercise, but we did find that most of the goals and the indicators that were already available weren't necessarily a great match for exactly what those dimensions wanted to capture. And that was especially true for the global dimensions, which were much, much harder to find specifics for in local policy documents or data that was available to us. Next slide, please. But this approach, this target and indicator work, is the kind of view that now lots of cities have engaged with and in their own ways have been able to show on their donut some level of performance for how their city is doing. All of these are completely unique. They measure different things. Their goals are defined differently, but overall, according to that social and ecological balance, we're able to see some sort of visual of where a city pictures itself now. We can see the social shortfall and the ecological overshoot quite clearly in this way. And it's worth noting that, you know, no place on earth really is currently thought to be existing and operating in that safe and just space for humanity. But again, this framework does ask us to take a long view on this, and hopefully we would see those red bars start to get smaller. Each of these places has had to make choices about what they measure, what they display in this framework, and everywhere's come up against their own sorts of barriers about what's available, what they measure, what they are clearly able to define. Some places have therefore chosen to just focus on local dimensions because those things in a city are much more commonly measured. And often these available targets and indicators give us only a partial fit for what that dimension tries to entail. And that's something that, at least with our thriving definitions, we have tried to go a bit further with in Glasgow. Next slide, please. So these are our thriving definitions, which some of you I'm sure will have seen. These are the ones that we co-produced with stakeholders across the city, and the City Council adopted them in 2023. And these definitions give us a detailed view of what thriving would mean for each of these social, ecological, global and local dimensions. And they are specific to the ethos and the framing of the donut. And we're currently doing some more work to show how and where they are actually all interconnected. And these definitions were created through workshops in discussion with some of our City Council partners. And so this is a really unique, Glasgow relevant, holistic, sort of forward-thinking vision of what the city could look like. And the next logical stage of this process then is to determine what and how we actually gauge our progress towards this vision of prosperity. So we know we need measurements that show us how we're doing now, that will allow us to track our achievements over time. And these measurements hopefully will be specifically tailored to this whole system vision. And partly because it is so broad, this process of indicator selection or creation really benefits from discussions and input with people that are working across the system. So we're really so pleased that so many of you have joined us today to be part of this discussion and this process. And I think that's probably a great place for me to hand over to Chris, who can take us through some of the indicator development process in a bit more detail. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Annika, for setting the scene. So yeah, my name is Chris Hassan, and I'm a research associate at Gallant. I'm working mainly on the quantitative modeling side of things. And some of you might recognize me from the one-to-one meetings regarding the indicators. So before diving into the process of developing indicators, I think it is important to discuss sort of the motivation or the need for creating these indicators. So First of all, indicators will allow us to sort of measure progress in each of the thriving definitions, which we call dimensions or domains. So forgive me if I use these terms interchangeably. So to do this sort of effectively, we would need to set metrics, thresholds, and targets. So to very briefly clarify the distinction between these terms, metrics sort of provide actual quantifiable measurements. For instance, we can consider annual carbon emissions as an indicator for climate change. You can also consider healthy life expectancy as sort of a proxy indicator for health. Targets basically represent desired levels of performance, which are often ambitious or even aspirational. Thresholds, in contrast, define acceptable boundaries of outcomes. However, these thresholds should be viewed not as goals, but rather as minimum acceptable limits. So in addition to targets and thresholds, we will also establish a baseline for each indicator, which will allow us to compare current and historical trends against our ambitious goals. In addition to that, as a long-term goal of Gallant, we need to align this work with the City Council, as well as a wide range of stakeholders, and provide sort of an evidence-based insights that can inform policy and decision-making. So the primary output of this work will be in the form of a comprehensive data set encompassing various social and environmental outcomes. And lastly, while the donut economics framework provides a valuable methodology for envisioning sustainable future, it still requires a further operationalization. So in parallel to this indicator work, we are trying to develop a mathematical model to explore sort of the synergies and trade-offs and interconnections among targets and indicators that may arise from this particular workpiece. Next slide, please. So this is sort of the timeline for the timeline of the process of developing our indicators. So the process began roughly 3 years ago with the desk-based research as covered earlier by Annika. So following the desk-based research, we held our first indicator workshop in March last year, where we brought together a diverse group of stakeholders. And the aim of this workshop was to identify potential indicators, refine selection criteria, and establish a collaborative foundation that would sort of crystallize over time. So given the complexity of global indicators, we also organized working group meetings and separate workshops to explore the best practices and methodology in that particular research area. My colleague Mary will discuss the global indicators in more detail later in this presentation, so I will leave it at that for now. So in addition to that, we held a series of one-to-one meetings with some officers from multiple departments across the City Council. And I can notice that some of you who attended these meetings are here, which is great. So this was sort of like an effort to break down the silos, bring together multiple perspectives, and at the same time sort of like leverage specialized knowledge within each area that we wouldn't have got held of otherwise. So through this engagement process, we managed to compile a comprehensive list of potential indicators. Then in September last year, we convened a focus group meeting with City Council officers to sort of refine this list and narrow down the indicators to sort of the most suitable ones and eliminate those that were deemed less relevant. Excuse me. So we initially planned to draft this work as an official committee paper and submit it to the council last December. However, some substantial gaps were identified and received some very helpful feedback from members of the council. So following that, we felt a bit stretched in terms of capacity and resources. So fortunately, we received some crucial support from the Gallant data workstream led by Claire and Nick. And we welcomed the new addition of Michaelis, who will speak after me, on the progress of indicator analysis. Next slide, please. So one of the advantages of adopting the donut framework is the creative capacity to visualize social and environmental indicators. So we recently collaborated with some colleagues from Glasgow University Software Services to co-develop this interactive digital tool for Glasgow Donut. This tool supports multiple functionalities. For example, by clicking on one of the domains or one of the dimensions, the user can view its corresponding thriving definition, explore the interconnections across the four lenses, and visualize shortfalls and overshoots in sort of an interactive and dynamic way. But it's crucial to mention that this is just a prototype phase. So we are yet to integrate the actual data into the back end of the tool. So the length of the bars don't have any realistic meaning at this stage. Next slide, please. Yeah, so the indicators will also be used to build a mathematical model that would sort of examine how various parts of the system interact with one another. So we will employ a framework called system dynamics, which is basically a quantitative technique designed to model, simulate, and analyze how systems behave and evolve over time. So the output of the model will be presented as an interactive platform, allowing the user to visualize not only the interdependencies within the system, but also explore the behavior of the system under various hypothetical scenarios. Next slide, please. So just before handing over to Michaelis, I'd like to address the development of the criteria that we applied for selecting our indicators. So we faced few challenges. So in the early stages, selecting indicators was a bit tricky. So for instance, data scarcity posed a challenge for certain domains or certain dimensions. And for other dimensions, we encountered an overwhelming abundance of candidate indicators. So in the latter case, we needed to sort of systematically narrow them down to a smaller, more manageable set. So this process, however, can be somewhat subjective, which is why we decided to establish a rather transparent list of criteria for selecting indicators. So, and then after we developed these criteria, we further ranked the criteria and prioritized them to suit our needs and the purpose of the indicator development. So, for example, accessibility is at the top of the criteria list, as it is essential to ensure that we would be able to access and publish the data. Second on the list is measurability, as each indicator must also be presented in some sort of a quantitative outcome, which will allow us to perform the necessary analysis and visualize shortfalls and overshoots in the digital donut. I won't go through all the criteria in detail, but happy to discuss this later. And as always, we must remain flexible and adaptable in our approach. So this list is not final and will be subject to an iterative process. And with that, I will hand it over to Michalis.
Thanks, Chris. Well, first of all, it's great to see you all here, so many people. My name is Michalis Georgi. I'm a research associate within the Gallant project, and I'm based at the Urban Big Data Center. So as Chris mentioned, I joined the project in February. So my work is focused on constructing the indicators and specifically focusing on the local lenses. So far, we've identified 50 indicators across the 23 local domains. Next, please. So this is the local and social domain. So you can see that we've got things like peace and justice, food, education, housing, culture, mobility, political voice, income and work, equality and diversity, water, health, connectivity, energy, and community. And the highlighted ones are the ones that we have an indicator for. And then we've got the other lens, which is the local ecological one. And we've got cleanse the air, for instance, store carbon, regulate temperature, house biodiversity, build and protect soil, cycle water, harvest energy, and enhance well-being. So for all these, we've got 20 data sources or providers. And initially, we've started constructing the indicators from the Scottish Household Survey. So we've got 10 indicators from this one. And then we did some work to create indicators from the Glasgow Household Survey. And we've got 4 indicators from this data set. All the other indicators will be built using other data sources and providers. Next slide, please. Right, so I'll start showing you some of the indicators that we've created. So as you can see here, I'm starting with the Scottish Household Survey indicators. We've created 10 out of the 10 that we've identified. And the first one is within the mobility domain. So this is the modal share indicator. And you can see on the plot here that we've got different councils, but also in the middle top row, we've got the average for the whole of Scotland. And well, as probably expected, the black line, which is the highest one, is a driver of a car or a van. And I should say that this is just a static plot, but we also have another one which is interactive. Next, please. Yeah. So this is the interactive plot, and you can see that we can choose the council and the mode of travel, and we can compare directly between councils and modes of travel. Next, please. So next up is the public transport satisfaction, again within the mobility domain. So the question here within the Scottish Household Survey was overall, how satisfied or dissatisfied are you with each of these services? And we've plotted those who answered that they're very or fairly satisfied. And again, you can see the data here for different councils and the average for Scotland, and we've got data from 2012 to 2022. We also have another interactive plot for this one as well. This is a little bit more simple because there's not many different modes of travel as in the previous one, so we can choose each council and then compare public transport satisfaction across all councils. Next, please. The next one is access to bikes. So the question here was, how many bicycles are available for use by adults in your household? And as you can see here, we've plotted the percentage of households with at least one bicycle. And again, all the councils and the average for Scotland. And we also have an interactive plot for this one. Which is this, and it's exactly the same as the previous one. So a more simplistic view where we can compare between councils. Next, please. So this one, we're moving on to another domain, which is connectivity. So the indicator here is the percentage of households without internet access. And the question was, does your household currently have access to the internet from home? And we've plotted the percentage of households here. Again, same story as in the previous ones. You can see that Glasgow City is the first one, and then the average for the whole of Scotland, and then different councils. Next, please. Yeah. Now, next up is the community domain. So the volunteering work indicator. So the question here was, thinking back over the last 12 months, have you given up any time to help any groups, clubs, or organizations in an unpaid capacity? And we can see here there's some difference between councils, but not that much. And again, the same story in the middle. You can see the average for Scotland. I should say that we have interactive plots for all these, but just for the sake of time, I'm not showing you all these interactive plots. Next, please. And then within the same domain, within the community domain, we've got the neighborhood rating. So the question was, thinking about the neighborhood that you live in, how would you rate it as a place to live? And we've plotted here the answers of very or fairly good. And we can see again the councils, data from 2012 to 2022, and the average of Scotland. Next, please. And next one is the culture domain. So the cultural engagement indicator. And the question here again was, in the last 12 months, have you been to any of these events or places? So there was a list of cultural places, and then we plotted the percentage of cultural engagement here. For this indicator, the question was not every year, so we've got data only from 2018 to 2022. Next, please. Again, within the culture domain, so we've got the cultural satisfaction, and there was again a list of things, of council services. So the question was, how satisfied or dissatisfied are you with each of these council services? And we've plotted here the positive satisfaction with these cultural services. And we've got one line of plots with the ones for libraries, then the second one for museums and galleries, and then the third one for theaters and concert halls. Next slide, please. And the next one is the political voice domain. So the indicator is political influence here. So the question was, do you agree with the statement that you can influence decisions affecting your local area? We've plotted the percentage of agreement, so people who agreed with this statement, and we can see here again the average for Scotland and all the percentages for different councils. Next one, please. And yes, so this is the enhanced well-being domain. So the indicator here that we've identified is green or blue space proximity. So the question for the survey was, how far away from your home is the nearest public green or open space, and how long would it take you to walk there? And we've plotted the proximity to green space within a 10-minute walking distance by all councils, and we can see the deviations between councils here, but also the average for Scotland. And now we move on to the Glasgow Household Survey indicators. So from this survey, we've got 4 indicators that we've created, and the first one is the food domain, and the indicator for the food cost concern. What's quite important here is that you can see that there's a difference in the time periods for data sets. So here we only have data for 2022 to 2024. And this is only for Glasgow, so the whole of Glasgow, the percentage of households where food cost is among their 2 or 3 top financial concerns. And you can see this is pretty stable, around 57 to 58%. Next one, please. Next one from the same question. So we used the rent cost concern, and we've plotted the percentage of households where rent cost is among their 2 or 3 top financial concerns. Again, pretty stable answers here, around 25%. Same question where you can see some difference here. So this is the energy domain and the indicator for the energy cost concern. And here you can see the crisis of the energy prices in 2022 affected quite a lot the answers. So from 84% approximately, we went down to 59.7% in 2024. And then the last one from the Glasgow Household Survey indicators is the culture, within the culture domain, the sports centers satisfaction indicator. So here we've got data from 2019 to 2024, and we've plotted the percentage of households in Glasgow that are very or fairly satisfied with sports and leisure centers. And over the years, it's a pretty stable trend here. Next one, please. Right. And the final indicator that we've created is another one which has used open access data. So this is data directly taken from OpenStreetMap, and we've created 10-minute walk isochrones around next bike stations. So we were looking at the access to bike sharing schemes, again, within the mobility domain. And we've calculated the percentage of within each Glasgow ward that is covered by next bike stations within a 10-minute walking distance. And you can see the static plot here where we've got each ward for Glasgow. And then there's also an interactive plot where we can click on each ward and see the difference between wards in the coverage. Next slide, please. Right, so just to sum up, a few key points here. So far, we've created 15 indicators. We've started with the Scottish Household Survey and the Glasgow Household Survey, and we'll be developing the rest of the indicators from other datasets. But one thing to mention, and probably one point for discussion, is that there are some data limitations. So first of all, do all these questions reflect the domain? Are they representative of the domain? And of course, there's different time periods across data sets, so it might be a little bit tricky to compare between indicators and use them directly within the donut framework. And one last thing is that it's probably a good time to start discussing about the thresholds and targets. So what should be the threshold for these indicators, and what should we aim for? And that's absolutely up for discussion. Thank you very much. And I think it's time to hand over to Mary.
Great, thanks so much. I'm Mary Minton. I was a research associate with Gallant, and now more recently I'm a research affiliate because I've moved over to Heriot-Watt as an assistant professor. And I've been carrying the torch with the global indicators a bit. I'm going to talk quickly so we have enough time for questions, but essentially the global indicators, as many of you might imagine, are much more complex in terms of access to data. So we have a dream that the indicators will have granular data that is Glasgow specific and sensitive enough to detect inequalities and change over time. That's sort of the dream. Next slide. But there are a lot of challenges with the global indicators in terms particularly of granularity of the data that is available. Most of the options that we were able to find for databases involve scaling down from either UK level or Scottish level data down to the Glasgow level, which makes it quite restrictive in terms of capturing inequalities within Glasgow. It also makes it quite difficult to capture progress and changes over time due to that lack of sort of sensitivity and granularity of that data. And there's also really just a scarcity of robust global data sets on the myriad of social impacts. That was one of the hardest, has been and continues to be one of the hardest ones to find access to data that will really accurately depict the impact of a city like Glasgow on global dimensions. And the other one linked to that is a lot of the data sets that are available at the global level are static. For example, the Imported Modern Slavery Index was done at one point in time, so we don't know if it's going to be repeated, so we don't have a timeline or continuity of data. Next slide. So the reality for what we've been able to do with the global indicators is that we do have decent data because of the work that the Council has been doing with Climate View and the Climate OS in terms of the greenhouse gas emissions or carbon, and also then linked to the ocean acidification indicators. But for the other ones, what we've been able to do, again, is to use the UK or Scotland level data downscaled either per capita or scaled by percentage of GDP. And we do have some rough indices of social foundations in countries that supply resources to Glasgow, for example. And I think some of you that are in the online room were involved with the working group that we set up within Gallant between the university and the council to try to move this forward. And that has been really useful, but it's also identified a lot of these gaps. So next slide. Sorry. So the next steps, or what's really happening right now, there was a bit of a pause, but we started convening a working group, a global indicators working group with the Donut Economics Action Lab and the wider network, so that we can start to tap into some of the learning that's happened elsewhere and some of the advances that have been happening. So we've identified these different themes that we're going to then hold sessions about with this wider working group about consumption, about thresholds, about financial investments and corporate practices, also questioning the links to degrowth and decolonization. And the last point about narrative approaches is that for some cities, they have felt that these snapshot level indicators and sort of the more higher level scale down rough estimates are enough to tell the story or make the case for change and the need for action. But at least in the case of, as we've gone with Glasgow, is we want to go a bit beyond that. And I think the working group, the Glasgow specific working group, has really tried to say we want to do more than that. And so that's why this wider working group with Deal has been formed to try to work together with the international network. And I guess next step is the question of whether or not we want to reconvene the Glasgow specific global indicators working group kind of going forward. And yeah, that's me. I'm kind of trying to synthesize this down a bit so that we have more time for questions. Thank you. I'll hand it back over to Joe.
Hi, thanks everybody. That's been really helpful, and hopefully if you've not already posted your questions in the chat, you've got them kind of ready to ask. I'm just going to go through the 4 main areas that we thought would be useful for discussion. I've got a slide for each, and then what I'll do is we'll take the slides down and we can get everybody's cameras on. We'll stop the recording and we can start to have a bit of discussion. But one of the things that's really important, we've tried really hard to do as we've been working through this, is to make sure that we've established the links to other monitoring and indicator frameworks and identify gaps. So make sure that we're really clear. Lots of the indicators that we're using do exist elsewhere. What we're looking to do is make those accessible all in one place in the context of the Donut Economics framework. But what we realise is that some of those elements are missing. So we know about the work that's under development with refreshing the climate plan. We know about the area partnership dashboards. We know about what's available on the improvement service and what's being developed through community planning and so on. But we want to make sure if there's other things under development, then we really, we'd like to hear from you around those, and that can be in the chat or an email later on. The other thing that has kind of come up through some other work that we've been doing, particularly inspired but by work with the economic development team, is just making sure that we are actually measuring the right things. And it goes back to Mary's last point there about the extent to which we can enhance this data portrait with perhaps some more qualitative data, and thinking about how we capture that narrative and making sure it sits alongside. Like, we may end up with just a donut with colours, and that won't be enough on its own to tell a story and to inspire action. So just wanting to kind of place things in context around that. Michalis has already mentioned this, and Chris gave some really helpful definitions. Setting thresholds and targets, some of it will be obvious. We've got statutory targets and sort of statutory thresholds for some things, but for others it's going to be more difficult, and the approach we take will need to be done on an indicator by indicator basis, and we're looking forward to having a kind of a dialogue with folk around that. But it will need to be democratic and transparent so that we know how we kind of settled on the figures that we have. And the last point as well is just about making sure that this isn't something that just sits on a shelf. So Annika mentioned this at the beginning. It's actually probably more, the process of us doing this is probably more important than the product. The fact that we've got people engaging with us around thinking about the baseline and where we want to be and the actions that we want to take to get us there is probably going to have just as much impact as the final thing that we might produce at the end of Gallant. So just wanted to kind of put that up there and think about how that works in terms of the policy making cycle and how we work with decision makers.